So welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar lecture with our own experts from Hebrew University. Today it will be our last webinar before the summer break, and we will begin again with a new series in September. For this last webinar, we have the honor of hosting Dr. Yahalom-Mack. She is head of the Laboratory of Archaeological Materials and Ancient Technologies at the Institute of Archaeology at the Hebrew University and co-director of the Tel Abel Beth excavations. Specializing in archaeo-metallurgy, the study of ancient metals, she uses cutting-edge technologies to determine the origin of the archaeological metals and other materials. Today, her lecture will be on the topic Unveiling the Secret of the Archaeological Site at Tel Abel Beth Maacah. Following the lecture, you are welcome to ask any question by raising your digital hand, and I will open for you the microphone. You can also write your question in the chat. In the next days, you will receive the recording of the webinar by email. And now, Dr. Yahalom-Mack, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen.
Great, yeah. Yes, we can see it perfectly.
Okay, can you see my
Yes, I can see it perfectly.
Okay, thank you, Maacah, very much for inviting me to talk about my excavation tonight, especially since I was supposed to be there these days excavating, and because of COVID-19, I didn't get the chance. I'm still thinking about excavating during August, but we shall see. Anyway, Abel Beth Maacah is a huge mound at the very northern end of the Hula Valley, right here. And it's quite close to Damascus. We will see why this is important later in the lecture. It's very close to the Phoenician coast, to Tyre and to Sidon, only 35 kilometers away, only 30 kilometers to Chatzor, and we have a neighboring site, a very important one, of Tel Dan. You can see here the tel, 100 dunam in size, one of the last tels in Israel that were never excavated. Its location at the border with Lebanon prevented excavations in past years. And you can see how Metula, the modern city, is located just to the north, and then Marj Ayun, which is a valley that leads directly to the Phoenician coast. The Phoenician coast can also be approached via the low mountains to the west. Since the 19th century, we already know that this particular tel is Tel Abel Beth Maacah. The reason that we know this is since the village, the Arab village that existed here until 1948, preserved the ancient name. The village name was Abil El Kamech. Kamech is flour. They were producing flour. And they have in the name of the village the word Abil, which has no specific meaning in Arabic, but it does preserve the name Abel that is mentioned in the Bible. You can see here other mentions of Abel Beth Maacah. Sorry, the mentions of Abel Beth Maacah in the Bible, which also reinforce the identification of this tel with the site Abel Beth Maacah because of the geographical description of the war campaigns of two kings. The first, Ben-Hadad, the Aramean, in the beginning of the 9th century, who says that he listened to Asa, king of Judah, and sent commanders of his armies against the city of Israel, conquering Iyon, which we know is in Marj Ayun, the valley just to the north of Metula in Tel Diban, and then Abel Beth Maacah and all Kinnerot with all the land of Naphtali. Another description, 100 years later, or a little more, 8th century, in the days of King Pekach of Israel, King Tiglat-Pileser of Assyria, came and captured Ion again, Abel Bet Maacah. Dan is not mentioned, Yanoach, Kedesh, Chatzor, and we know all these cities, and the geography tells us that this is Abel Bet Maacah, and the site, I just want to mention, is also mentioned without the suffix Bet Maacah, just the name Abel is mentioned in extra biblical sources also of the 2nd millennium. Another very famous story from 2 Samuel is the story of the rebel Sheba ben Bichri and the wise woman. Sheba ben Bichri, who rebelled against David, according to the narrative, ran away to the north as far as he could go, and he reached Abel Bet Maacah and was followed by Job, the commander of King David. And then when Job reaches Abel Bet Maacah, he has a very interesting conversation with a wise woman whose name is not given, and she convinces him that, or discusses with him other alternatives than the destruction of the city. And she says, long ago, they used to say, get your answer at Abel. And that settled it. We are the peaceful and the faithful in Israel. You are trying to destroy a city and a mother in Israel. Why do you want to swallow up the Lord's inheritance? And there's a few things to learn from this narrative, which we're not sure when it was written. The first thing is that Abel used to be a place where people came to ask questions. The second detail is that we believe that she calls herself a mother. It's more clear from the Hebrew, biblical narrative, but in the translation it goes a little lost because it says a city that is a mother, and that's already an interpretation. In Hebrew it is a city and a mother, and we think that she refers to herself as a mother, meaning a prophet. And the second thing that might be learned from here is that she says we are the peaceful and faithful in Israel. We don't know when exactly, but it gives us the impression that people in Abel need to prove their alliance to Israel, their faithfulness to Israel. Anyway, these are my colleagues: Robert Mullins from Azusa Pacific, Nava Panitz-Cohen, Dr. Robert Mullins, Dr. Nava Panitz-Cohen from the Hebrew University. They initiated the excavation. This is a bad picture of myself. And this is Professor Amichai Mazar and his wife Ora Mazar. And Amichai Mazar, we are all his students. And I just wanted to mention that we work in his methodology and under his encouragement. Anyway, in 2012, my colleagues, I joined in later, they conducted a survey, and they found out that these periods from the 3rd millennium BC to the present were present on the Tel, and the excavation began in 2013, and only several, not all of the periods that were found, the sherds were found of them during the survey, were represented in the archaeological findings, but we could see the Middle and Late Bronze Age cities, which are from the 2nd millennium, basically a Canaanite city, and then Iron Age, which is the focus of my talk today, and Persian period. The Early Bronze Age, which is a city that belongs to the 3rd millennium, the earliest city that was built here, is probably hiding right down here, and we didn't reach it yet. But the city from the Middle and Late Bronze Age, we already know. I'm just going to show it briefly. This is a very good illustration, as the entire city, the lower Tel and the upper Tel, were surrounded by a fortification, and you can see it here. And we found the part of this fortification here at the southern end of the mound. And many of these, in another area, many of these jar burials containing skeletons of babies, which was a common practice during the Bronze Age, the Middle Bronze Age, to bury the early premature babies or babies that were just born and died, passed away, to bury them under the floors, kind of putting them back in the uterus. Anyway, I'm going to jump forward, and I want to show you a very interesting sequence, a robust sequence. In area A, this is the lower tell. This would be the upper tell. Upper tell is in the north, and this is the south here. And you can see that right in the middle, on the eastern slope of the tell, there's area that we call area A. You can see how all the areas that were excavated were chosen in areas that did not cover the Arab village, the remains of the Arab village here that ceased to exist in 1948. So area A here, we have a very robust sequence from the 12th century until the 9th century. You can see that each color represents a different settlement, a different occupation. And there are many, many of these occupations, at least 6 main strata just in this area and just during the Iron Age. Now, I'm not going to focus on this early Iron Age stratum here. I'm going to show it very briefly. I just want to mention that in the beginning of the Iron Age, Chatzor, which was a major city during the second millennium, during the Middle and Late Bronze Ages, ceased to exist. It was destroyed in the 13th century BC. And after that, there was a very small, sparse settlement on the Tell. But here at Abel Bet Maacah, right after the Late Bronze Age, we have a settlement that is growing into a major city or urban, kind of an urban center with a public building. And this is very different from neighboring Chatzor. It's also very different from all the small Israelite settlements that we find across the Galilean mountains and the Central Hill country. And so I just want to show you a little bit of this 11th century settlement here, a very interesting building that we're still contemplating about, because it contained both industrial activity, but a lot of cultic activity also. Cultic activity expressed in many of these standing stones, matzebot, that were found at the entrance and in other places around the building. And a lot of other finds that that indicate some cultic activity. This is another one of those matzebot. It's plain, there's nothing on it, but it's not functional. It was not used for anything else, and this is why we interpret it as a matzebah. You can see the bench next to it. And a lot of just findings that are very peculiar. We had a dog buried in the entrance of the building right here. And inside was an equid burial. And then this antler, these horns were found in one of the rooms. And a bull figurine and others. I'm going really quickly because I want to proceed, but this is the basically a building that was destroyed in the late 11th century. Now, right after, you can see here that after this building was destroyed in massive fire, we finally see a really impressive building built here after a few layers of inhabitants. We see a very interesting, very finely built building. You can see the elongated walls and the stone cobble floors right here and here. And I don't know if you can see this, there are pillars decorating the entrance. Of course, several entrances, one on top of the other, telling us that this building had developed over a while. And then what I want to focus on is in one room, this room, again, very cultic in nature. You can see it here. This is what we just looked at, the entrance with the pillars. This is the building, this is the long wall and the stone cobbled floor. And this is a very interesting building with the backspace here, these huge boulders dividing spaces within the building, and an entrance or an exit into another unexcavated space that we are very keen and curious about, keen to excavate. Anyway, you can see many features, especially this interesting installation. We'll look at this more closely. This is a 3D model that I'm not going to activate now because it's kind of going to collapse my entire PowerPoint presentation, but you can see that it was taken with a drone, and these are the boulders that divide the spaces. You can see 1, 2, 3 of these. This is the entranceways, and these are basalt stone mortars. Just some of the finds that we see is the weights, an oven down here, again, antlers, and this very elaborate razor made of bronze that was found just next to one of these horns. You can see here what we understand as kind of an offering table with basalt pebbles one on top of the other. You can see it here much better, like this. And you can already see here, this is not the final excavation season, but you can already see how this installation here is emerging together with this small space surrounded by a low wall. Now, this is, again, one of those mortars found next to this kind of a table, and it's cracked because of the intense fire that destroyed this room. Eventually, in the destruction, we found huge pottery remains of pithoi, which are very large containers that at least 2 of them used to stand right here. This is just for you to get an impression how the destruction looks, how it's all broken and collapsed, and mud bricks and burnt mud bricks and ash. And you can see here that something is hiding, and this interesting vessel was uncovered within the destruction debris. What we're looking at is some kind of a stand, what we would call a cultic stand, because of these leaves and the general shape, and the fact that we have another vessel. This is just the foot of the other vessel that was inserted here and held together with some kind of a rod. If you want to get the full picture, you just need to go looking in the contemporary destruction at Megiddo. You understand now how it looks. This stand here decorated with painting. The petals are here, up here and not down there, but it's the same idea on the holes and the foot of the vessel, the bowl, and again, these petals. We're still hopeful that when we finish excavating this room, we shall find the bowl. Anyway, just to get a closer look at this interesting installation, it's unparalleled as far as we know. It's built of earth, just debris. It's plastered. It's plastered in several layers, which I don't think is constructional. I think it was fixed again and again. And it's plastered together with the wall behind it. You can see the location of these bowls here, basins. And just looking at the top of this, you can see that the installation, we're just missing its upper part. I am wondering whether it might have been horned here and here, but I'm not sure about this. But what's unique here that we have some kind of what I would call a kosher sink. We have two depressions and they're plastered and there's a hole for liquids to be drained outside. Where are they drained to? The answer is, this is the outgoing hole, and the liquids here are drained outside into the debris around the installation / altar. And here you can see the at least three layers of plaster that covered this mud-built installation. Okay. Now this is a reconstruction made by Lynn Rittmeyer, kind of suggesting perhaps how it could have looked, maybe this large boulder standing or lying down, and how this would stand. It's a thought. It's a little different here and here, but the end of the story is again a massive destruction that you've already seen. And according to carbon-14, it occurred sometime in the 10th century, whether early 10th century or mid-10th century, or maybe late 10th century, I'm not sure we can say. One exquisite artifact that was found in the burnt building outside this cultic room, but in the burning and the destruction, was this ivory. You see it's blue from the fire, but it's an ivory head, basically a seal. You can see what was on the back of this seal. I'm moving forwards because I'm running out of time. Okay, so this is basically what I want to show you here. This is the long wall, if you remember, and one of those cobbled floors. What I wanted to show here is that not far from the destruction of the Iron Age 1 in the 10th century, we have the building of a new settlement. Again, probably within the 10th century, right after, a little bit after the Iron 1 destruction. And it all happens during the 10th century BC. Now you can see here that this red building is covered by these 10th, 9th century remains. If this green building is kind of related to the time of the judges or the Israelite settlement or what so, this building is already from the time of the monarchy, okay? 10th, 9th centuries. And you can see that a lot have changed in this city. We don't have the full plan, but it looks different. You can see by the orientation of some of the walls, by their width, by their construction, and the vessels, the pottery vessels are very different. It's a different city that was constructed on top of this, what we understand as a public, perhaps administrative building. And what else has changed is the political scene around the site. Around Damascus in particular is growing fast during the late 10th century. The early Ben-Hadad that we mentioned before with his war campaign was in the beginning of the 9th century, okay? And then sometime in the 9th century, Hazael, the strongest Damascene king, basically destroyed large parts of the area, of the region. And so they're growing fast during the 10th century. And then we have the Israelites who are developing, and I intentionally did not draw the borders of the Israelite kingdom because according to the biblical text, it includes Dan, right? But we have a lot of voices today claiming, suggesting that the Israelite kingdom never extended as far as Tel Dan. And so this is an interesting question, whether Abel Bet Maacah was part of the Israelite kingdom, and when was it part of the Israelite kingdom, if at all? And then we have the Phoenician sphere and the city of Tyre, who's growing very strong and already ruling the entire northern coast of Israel. And so Abel Bet Maacah is kind of in the midst of all this, and we have to wonder who is it paying its taxes to, and who do they relate themselves to? Who do they identify with? Anyway, I just want to show you a little bit of this new what we call Iron Age 2 city, and you can see here that we have many taboons and some kind of a granary. I'm going to go faster because I'm running out of time. You can see here the taboons that are contemporary with one another. It's a kind of a bakery and this granary with plaster on the inside. And I just want to mention two special finds. I'm not going to speak about this wonderful Kurnus bull horse. I want to speak about this one, which we identify as the Lord of the Animals. That's an individual holding two animals by their tails. He's controlling the animals and thus denoted the Lord of the Animals. And why is this important? Because we have very similar impression on vessels from the cultic precinct at Dan. And if the cultic precinct at Dan didn't exist during the 9th century, as some of the scholars today claim, then this is an interesting comparison. Anyway, another find on this floor, you can see is right immediately above the area of the cultic precinct that we never excavated, right on top of here. Basically what happened was that we had a bulk, which is an earth partition that we leave in order to learn and document the history of our excavations. We leave those occasionally, and then when we need to, we kind of take them apart after we document them. And so we wanted to remove one of those, but we saw tiny bones kind of falling out of the bulk. And so we decided to excavate this properly. And this is what we found. An amphora containing 420 astrogali bones. Astrogali bones are knuckle bones of animals, and they're used basically until traditional, even within traditional societies today. Astragales have many uses, and they're used as gaming pieces, and they're used for gambling, and they're used as apotropaic objects. They're even produced in other materials. But one of their main uses in the ancient world was divination, right? And this is a Greek example. And I think the most interesting or indicative thing about this hoard, that after removing the entire bulk, we realized that the vessel was sitting on a podium, on a raised podium on top of a stone floor. It was probably a public venue, and we understand this as some kind of a ceremony that took place here. This is how it looks in the laboratory while being identified. And we can tell you there are no pigs, there are no cows. They belong to sheep, goat, and deer. And this is Ariel Shatil, one of our archaeozoologists identifying the bones. And I just want to send you back to the verse telling us, that long ago they used to say, get your answers at a bell. Even though the text may be later and it may not be describing this exact time period, the interesting thing, I think, is that we're able to contextualize a find like this one, maybe. Okay, again, just to show you the continuity of the cult in this area. And another, which is another indication of some kind of occultic ceremony that took place here. I'm taking you really quickly up to the upper tell, to area B, where we found a massive casement building that belongs also to the same time period, 10th, 9th century. Our dates, our radiocarbon dates, tell us that this building was constructed probably in the late 10th century. And what I want to show you is some of the finds that came out of this amazing building that we certainly have not finished excavating. This Phoenician painted vessel, our now very famous bearded male figurine, a pendant with an impression of a boat. I'll show it to you in a minute more closely. And this tambourine lady figurine, and this is our painted Phoenician jar. And of course, many other Phoenician vessels. We have this tambourine lady that we know from throughout Israel, Judah, also in Syria. We have many, many of these ladies, but this is exquisite. It's painted, and you can see the necklace here. It's a very nice specimen. And this pendant, which depicts a boat, and according to Baruch Brandel, who is working on it, investigating it, he says this is a Phoenician boat. Anyway, just a word about our bearded guy. You can see just how famous he became. He's getting replicated on eBay. And you can see him here while being excavated. He's facing up. He's basically has been waiting for thousands of years for someone to come and unravel him. And who came? This guy, who kind of looks similar, I think. And he just came for a couple of hours to visit his girlfriend. And what can we say? He was the one to be the lucky guy to find him. You can see that it's basically a 5 centimeters piece, 5.5 in height. It's very small. It's very well made. It's made of faience, which is a kind of a silicate paste that was heated, and during heated, it got glazed, okay? They applied some paste with different metallic minerals that cause these colors. And you can see the hair locks and the bandana, which is a colorful one. And this is a very special piece, but we must confess that it's a kind of a common way to describe a Semite. This is a glazed tile from the palace of Ramesses III. It's a tile because you step on your enemies while walking into the palace, and one of these enemies is a Canaanite. And you see how he's described. And then throughout the Iron Age, these are clerks, Assyrian clerks. And this is a Phoenician king. Okay, he's also wearing one of these headbands. And so you can see it's not a very unique way of describing a person. On the other hand, there is no other object like it. And all the other faience heads are so very different. And so we kind of think that this was commissioned by someone living in that citadel. Just to show you a resemblance in another media, this is a clay mask from Achziv, a Phoenician site. And you see the naturalistic features and the hair locks. And I think he kind of looks the same. Anyway, I'm running forwards to one last find that was excavated 1 year ago in this area. It's just to the south of Area A, in Area K. and you can see a massive building coming up here, and each of these stars mark a jar. You can see it here in the plan, how the plan was, probably some kind of a storage building. And only when we came back to the lab and we asked our restorer, Adrienne Ganot, to reconstruct the vessel, she had shown us what we didn't see, an inscription on the side of the jar. And the inscription is a word, a name, that says Le Benayo, belonging to Benayo. And the interesting thing about it is that it's in Hebrew script. It has a Yahwistic ending, Yo, the name of Yahoo, but it's basically a short ending, which is very characteristic of the Israelite kingdom. Now, whether this vessel was imported from Israel or produced locally, we are still considering, although Anat Cohen-Weinberger, our petrographist, she examined the vessel and thinks that the vessel is local to the region, to the immediate surroundings of the site. Last word about carbon-14 dating. We have dates that span, and I'm not talking about the Canaanite city, I'm talking about the Iron Age, span the 12th until the 9th century BC. We have no dates, no radiocarbon dates in the 8th century, and we have no finds that may be related to the 8th century. And so the famous destruction that was allegedly done by Tiglath-Pileser III, we have no evidence for. And this is very important because many of the narratives that relate to Abel Bet Maacah were claimed to have been written during the 8th century while looking or observing at an 8th century reality. And since we don't have the 8th century to Abel Bet Maacah, this is a very problematic claim, because if Abel Bet Maacah never existed during the 8th century, how could you attribute all these texts to that century? Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Naama. It was really very interesting. So now I can see we have few questions in our question and answer box. So I'll take the first one from Vadli Kornatenu. I hope I said it properly. So he's asking, we could see that you used drones for photography, but did you use the drones equipped with LIDAR to survey the larger area, as that topography would be ideal for such research?
No, we haven't done LIDAR, but only in the past season, we started working on 3D models using the drones, and we just don't understand how we haven't done it before, because we sit here in the office and we really can tour around the Tel and look at the walls and the conjunction between the walls, and maybe LIDAR will be our next step. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have another question from Sheila Wexler about any population estimate for.
How many people lived on the Tel?
I think she meant this.
Okay, well, since we haven't excavated residential quarters, we just have one from the Middle Bronze Age, we don't have a way to do this calculation yet. Okay,
and now Leora Zabuski, she's asking, what is your hypothesis about the texts that are related to the 8th century?
Well, there was a claim that Ben-Hadad, that the text about the earlier king Ben-Hadad was copied from the text of Tiglath-Pileser, because these war campaign texts are very similar to one another. Perhaps the opposite occurred? I don't know.
Okay, we have also a question from Digital Hands. I will open the microphone of Joseph Oscar. You're unmuted now. Hello?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good evening. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. By the way, I lived for quite some time in Sfat, so I know the area a little bit. So, first question, the passage of the Bible, I missed it. From which book is it, please?
Which one?
The one you said about the mother of Israel.
Second Samuel 20.
From the Shmuel. Okay. The other question is you are mentioning about the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the early Iron Age, which is somewhere at the beginning of the 12th century. Can you please elaborate, how did the iron get in the area?
Iron is metal?
No, I mean the art itself. Working iron.
Oh, okay. When I say iron, I mean Iron Age, and it has nothing to do with working iron, because iron only starts to being used systematically during the 10th century, not before the 10th century BC. The reason that we call the Iron Age, beginning in the 12th century, is because very few first objects of iron begin to appear. These are prestigious objects, and they're not indicative of the real change. The real change occurs only in the 10th, 9th centuries BC, together with the cultural change that I have described after the destruction of the late Iron Age settlements, Iron Age 1 settlements.
Do you believe the iron arrived to the land of Israel from the Philistines?
I know that it didn't. We have, what we see is that the Israelites, the Judites, and the Philistines, they all adopted iron approximately at the same time. And the early iron artifacts that were found in Philistia are probably imported from Cyprus. And so the Philistines may have used a few of those elaborate, prestigious knives in the 12th century, but this is not related to the transfer of the technology, I think.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I would like to open the microphone of Ranan Dunovich. Ranan, you can speak now. You should open your microphone too.
Hello, I'm very happy to hear the lecture. I have a weird question, I would say. You mentioned the matzevot from the 12th century, 9th century, and I remember when the excavations from the Chalcolithic time in front of Gamla, more or less, there is an area of Chalcolithic time, and every house has a matzeva like this. Do you know anything about this? Is that a tradition that you can say in other centuries it was found as well?
Yes, well, the matzebot, we actually know from before the Chalcolithic period. We know them from the 10th, 9th, 8th centuries in the desert region. And matzevot, they have been used, for forever, and they were incorporated into the Canaanite cult very early on. And what we see with the use of matzebot at the Belbet Maacah is basically the continuation of Canaanite cult. And this goes together with that cultic stand, for example, that I have shown you, which is a cold stand that we can find in Ugarit in the 14th century, and we can find it in Syria in the late Bronze Age. This is elements of Canaanite culture that continue well into the Iron Age in Abel Bet Maacah and in other sites.
Thank you. You have mentioned as well that there was some industry. What kind of industry? It looks like it wasn't a small town, so it has to maintain itself except of agriculture. So what was the industry?
Well, when I said industry, I didn't mean the word industry, I meant production, and it could be food processing. You mean for the early Iron Age cultic building, right? This is what you're referring to. So
exactly,
it's not a real industry. It's just basically some kind of production, because we have installations there that were used, some kinds of ovens, maybe for baking. We're not really sure, but if you already mentioned the question of industry, I would just like to mention that from the 11th century until the 9th century, we have a very intensive production of copper in the Arabah, particularly in the Jordanian side of the Arabah at Feinan.
Yes, 70 kilometers north, yes.
Southeast of the Dead Sea, and what we feel is that this copper is moving through the valleys, the northern valleys of Israel, and up to Abel Bet Maacah, and from Abel Bet Maacah, they travel to the Phoenician coast. And from the Phoenician coast, we know that the tons and tons of copper that were mined and smelted in the Arabah are traveling to Greece and beyond. And so Abel Bet Maacah would have had a very significant role in the trade of these metals through to the Phoenician coast and then onwards across the Mediterranean.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now I would go to a question from the chat again, from Edith Goldman. Which is the percentage of the tell that has been excavated? And she's asking, maybe there will be more to find from the 8th century.
This is a very good possibility that we have not yet found the 8th century. As you could see, we kind of ignored or didn't want to interrupt the ruins of the Arab village that was on top of the tell, and we kind of excavated around it. And in addition, in the very upper part of the mound, we have 2 Israeli army bunkers. And therefore, we are unable to excavate at the very top peak of the mound. And so, yes, there is a possibility that we are missing an 8th century occupation on the site, but after 7 seasons of excavation and 1 survey, I can say with security that we do not have the horizon, the pottery horizon that we expect to find from the destruction of Tiglath-Pileser. And so at least the end of the 8th century, or the last third of the 8th century, we don't have. We might have early 8th century, but this is something that we still need to find out as we progress with the processing of the pottery finds from the site.
Okay, now we have a question from Andrew Herbeck, again from the chat. With the finding of the seal of the Lord of Beasts and all of the antlers in years past, do we know if there is any connection with, I'm not sure I'm understanding, so I will just read it for you. Do we know if there is any connection with our site and Reshef of the stag?
Okay. I think I know Andrew. I have a feeling he's one of our volunteers. It's a very good question. We have been thinking about the antlers found in 2 successive cultic structures. And we have been suggested, and we're thinking about the connection of these antlers which are deer antlers, to a god named Reshef of the stags. And this Reshef is mentioned on stelae from northern Syria. And he's a major god in various areas. He was adopted by the Egyptians during the second millennium, but he still does exist in Syria and the environs. And there's a good chance that he is being worshipped in our cultic precincts. Yes.
Okay, I would like now to open the microphone to Mary Simew, sorry. Mary, you can speak now. Mary, can you? Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now yes.
Okay, let me unmute. Okay, thank you. So thank you for the wonderful presentation. My question is, in your view, what's the significance of the boats that you had indicated that were found on one of the artifacts? And then there's that container which you said might be probably that there was gaming happening, and you said that I don't know if I got you right, they were not the pigs or any other animals' bones, but they must have been for the goats and the sheep. I was just thinking, could it be that there was a possibility of sacrifices that were being made by the Israelites?
I didn't get everything that you asked. You started with the seal impression of the boat. That is, if the boat is indeed Phoenician, and we have a lot of Phoenician pottery in this citadel, and all we can say is there's a strong Phoenician influence, or there are contacts with the Phoenician coast, specifically during the 9th century. And this is interesting to us because, you know, if we stop thinking a little bit or overthinking whether these people are related to around Damascus, or they're related to the Israelite kingdom, or maybe they're local, unrelated kind of political entity, we have to stop and kind of look to the West. There's a very tight relationship between our site and the Phoenician coast. And it's a good question, what does it mean? And I think it's an economic tie, but maybe it's more than that. And so this is the way I see all these kind of Phoenician smells that are coming out of this citadel. And your next question about the astragali, I'm not sure what you were asking. What we feel is that—
Yes, let me do that again if you don't mind.
I can say what I think I heard. There are two stories related to the astragali pot. There is the story of each and every single astragalus. We have looked under the microscope. We can see that they were used. There is wear use signs on it. Some of them were drilled. One of them has insertion of an iron piece. And so we know that each and every bone has a history, has its own biography. But the question is, what happens when you take all these bones on a single occasion and you collect them, you take them together and place them on a raised podium, and then you leave them there, never to come back? This is a kind of a desertion. It's a kind of at least, maybe we're imagining, but we think it's a kind of a dramatic event that occurred sometimes in the 9th century. We don't know why, when exactly, what kind of trouble they were facing, but they did some kind of a ceremony and then they left it there. And so it's not unique to Abel Bet Maacah. We have several hundreds of these astrogali in a cultic corner at Megiddo, for example, and in other sites. And we know it's a practice related to cult, but we don't know exactly what this ceremony was and why it occurred when it occurred.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like now to open the microphone of Edith Goldman. Edith, you are unmuted now. Edith, you can open your microphone.
Okay, there we go. I'm thinking of geography. How does the size of this site compare to Megiddo, Hatzor, even Tel Dan itself? And is it on Derech HaMelech or Derech Hayam? I'm just trying to situate how this connects with the rest of the geography.
Okay, well, Hatzor was the largest site during the second millennium, but in the Iron Age, it's not that big, it's smaller. Abel Bet Maacah is a good size settlement. It resembles Tel Rehov. It's a little bit smaller than Megiddo. It's quite a big site. And as for the roads, you make a good point that we know of two roads, one that comes up through the coast, right, Derech Hayam, and the other one that goes through the backbone of Jordan, which may have been the road that carried at first the copper from the Arabah, but then at some point they have to descend. They have to come down to the Jordan Valley. And then what they can do is they can come down at the Bet She'an Valley, and then, through the northern valleys, carry the merchandise over to the coast. That's a possibility. And I have analyzed copper from Tel Rehov, and I can tell you that they have been using Feinan copper, which is not an indication for trade, but still. The other option is that they continue from Rehov through the Kinneret up to Abel Bet Maacah, and then through the Marj Ayun Valley out to the Phoenician coast.
Thank you. We have a question from Nami Stambler. Aside from using drones, what big technology changes have impacted your excavation in the last few years?
We are so we are very simple excavation, I must say. We're not very technological, and a little bit proud of it. And we have been using the excavation methods, as I said, that were developed by Amichai Mazar, and they have been working, and he's been publishing his excavations now. He's almost, Tel Rehov is almost out, and he's published Tel Bet She'an and Tel Batash, and he's done it all, not digitally. And we're basically using the same techniques, and just now we're beginning to implement some of the new technology, particularly the 3D modeling, which is an amazing way to document the site. And the drones are a major part of this. When we were excavating at Tel Rehov and we needed to photograph the excavation area from the top, we would call the guys from the date, the agricultural date picking guys, and they would come with their big machines and lift the photographer up and have him take the pictures. And today we just use drones. All we need to do is tell the Israeli army not to shoot it down because it's on the border. But once we've done that, of course, we're using drones all the time now.
Thank you. And we have a question from David Lev. were the animals on either side of a tree on the seal you showed as griffins?
Were they what?
Griffins. Not clear to me either what it is.
Ah, griffin. No, 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 no. Let me go back. Okay. This is a horned animal standing on two legs. This is the sacred tree. And this guy, I don't know how to say it in English. If you can help me. Is this,
it's a kind of bird or something?
yeah, but it's the big one. I forgot the name.
Ostrich.
Ostrich, thank you.
Welcome.
Ostrich. This is an ostrich, and this seal, it's not politically correct, but it's denoted a negro head, and they are actually quite frequent, and we know them from many sites, but this is a very nice example, and we're still working on it. We haven't investigated it yet. We have a lot of materials, a lot of finds coming out of this excavation, and each and every one of them needs specific attention, and we need to study their distribution, the parallels, and kind of see if they're characteristic of the entire region, you know, Israel, Syria, Lebanon, or maybe more particular to certain areas, and then more indicative of some kind of a material culture.
Okay, I think our time is over. I know there are a few other questions, but I would suggest everybody to write to me. You all have my email, and I will be glad to forward all your questions to Naama, and she will answer. So thank you, everybody, for this evening, for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Naama, for your very interesting lectures.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for being here.
And as I told you, you will all receive the recording tomorrow, and we'll be in touch in September for the next series of webinars from the Hebrew University. Thank you.
A lot of health. בריאות לכולם.
Okay. Thank you, Naama. להתראות.
להתראות.